What if the man you've spent your entire life trying to become was never real? You don't notice it at first. The shift happens slowly. At 5 years old, you're told to be polite. At 10, you're told to be good. At 15, you're told to be desirable. And by 25, you're not even sure who you're trying to impress anymore. You just know that if she doesn't choose you, something inside you feels broken. Somewhere along the way, you stopped asking what you wanted and started performing for what they wanted to see. You studied harder not because you loved learning, but because you hoped she'd notice. You went to the gym not for strength, but for validation. You chased money not to build, but to prove. And every time you achieved something, it still felt hollow, because the applause you craved never came, or if it did, it wasn't enough. It never was. You called it love, but it was survival. It was your unconscious attempt to feel worthy, not in your own eyes, but in hers. And now, years later, you wake up with the terrifying realization you weren't building a life. You were building a stage, and you're still waiting for her to clap. But what if the real crisis is not that she hasn't seen you, it's that you've never dared to see yourself? And what if the only way forward is to burn the script and start building something that would still matter, even if no one ever saw it? They told you it was love. That flutter in your chest, that ache in your gut, that ache you felt when she smiled, when she turned away, when she didn't text back. You called it passion. You called it longing. But what if I told you it was none of those things? What if it was a lie, not her lie, yours? Otto Weininger said it clearly, and without mercy, man doesn't fall in love with a woman as she is. He falls in love with what she represents: an idea, a reflection, a fantasy. She becomes the mirror in which he projects the version of himself he wants to become, not a partner, not a person, a permission slip to finally feel worthy. You don't chase her because of who she is. You chase her because of who you are when she chooses you. And that's the trap. Because when your entire sense of value hinges on being chosen by someone else, you're no longer free. You are a performer, auditioning for approval. You should have given yourself long ago. That ache in your chest, that was never love. That was desperation. That was the hope that her gaze would finally silence the voice inside you saying, "You're not enough." But she was never meant to fix that. She was never meant to carry the weight of your identity. And when she walks away, as so many inevitably do, you're not left mourning her. You're mourning the version of yourself that never got to exist because she didn't say yes. And in that moment, you finally see it. The tragedy, the illusion, the self-deception you've called love. It wasn't her you were in love with, it was the man you hoped to become if only she had chosen you. And until you confront that truth, you will repeat the cycle, over and over, woman to woman, relationship to relationship, still searching for that reflection, still chasing a ghost in the mirror. But it was never her, it was always you. You've been told that needing love is noble, that sacrificing for her is heroic, that proving yourself to be worthy of a woman's admiration is the mark of a good man. But what if that belief, that deep aching desire to be seen by her, is the very thing that has betrayed you? Otto Weininger didn't write for comfort. He wrote to expose. And one of his most brutal truths was this: the man who is dependent upon the woman for the valuation of his life has already betrayed himself, not her betrayal yours. You thought you were building for love, but really you were building for applause. You told yourself you were rising for yourself, but deep down you were rising so she might finally look at you and say, "You're enough." That's not love. That's performance. That's survival dressed up as romance. And here's the haunting part: she never asked you to do it. You sculpted your body, built your business, polished your image, not for the joy of becoming, but for the moment you might be chosen. But every time you handed her the power to determine your worth, you carved away a piece of your sovereignty, your crown, your masculine essence. And the higher you climbed in hopes of her recognition, the further you fell from yourself. Because the man who needs her to clap will never stand on his own. The moment you build your empire for her validation is the moment you surrender your throne. You become the architect of your own prison, a castle built from insecurity, guarded by illusions, and ruled by the fear of not being enough. And here's the most tragic part: even if she chooses you, it won't satisfy you. Because it was never really about her. It was always about your refusal to choose yourself. So ask yourself, who are you without her eyes upon you? Would you still speak, still build, still rise if no one ever noticed? Because until the answer is yes, until you stop needing her to say, "You matter, you are not living," you're auditioning. You were not made to orbit someone else's light. You were made to become a source of light yourself, a furnace of meaning forged in solitude, lit not by applause but by inner fire. Yet from the moment you first felt the sting of rejection, you started shrinking. You began crafting yourself into what the world might admire: the charming guy, the provider, the strong one, the safe bet. But every time you shaped yourself to be accepted, you chipped away at your freedom. Otto Weininger warned us long ago, a man who needs to be chosen is no longer sovereign. He becomes passive, reflective, feminine in essence. Not because femininity is wrong, but because it is not the destiny of the masculine soul. Masculinity begins in solitude, not isolation solitude. The ability to stand, to build, to become, without needing to be seen. And yet that's the part most men fear the most: the silence, the empty room, the lack of an approving gaze. Because in that silence you face a terrifying question: would I still live this way if no one ever watched? If the answer shakes you, you're not alone. Most men today don't rise out of vision, they rise out of desperation to be admired. But admiration is fleeting. And the man who builds for it is forever enslaved to those who give or withhold it. True masculinity begins the moment you no longer need a witness. When you choose to rise not for her, not for the crowd, not for your father's praise, but because you must. Because something within you refuses to stay quiet. That's the man who cannot be manipulated. That's the man who cannot be owned. That's the man who becomes dangerous in the best possible way because he no longer fears being unseen. So ask yourself honestly, are you building to be free or building to be watched? Because freedom and validation can never live in the same house. You were not born to be chosen. You were born to choose yourself and stand. You wake up, check your phone, scroll post, like compare. It feels normal, now second nature. But beneath the surface, something inside you is quietly starving, and you don't even realize it's happening. Because you've confused movement with meaning, you've mistaken attention for affection and performance for purpose. This isn't just your story, it's the story of an entire generation of men raised to perform rather than become. You were taught to be good, to be impressive, to be liked, but no one taught you how to be real. So you learn to live your life as a presentation, a curated image, always polished, always controlled. But that constant performance, it's costing you your soul. Otto Weininger saw this sickness long before the digital age turned it into an epidemic. He warned of the man who builds his identity around external recognition, the man who lives not to create but to be seen creating. You've become that man. Not because you are weak, but because you were never shown another path. And now, you chase likes instead of legacy, views instead of vision. You've traded the sacred silence of inner growth for the temporary thrill of being noticed. But here's the truth. No one wants to say anything that comes too easily was never yours to begin with. And that performance you've perfected, it's a mask. One that grows heavier with every click, every glance, Every new post that screams, "See me," while your soul whispers, "Who am I?" when no one's watching. You weren't born to entertain. You were born to build, to suffer meaningfully, to create something that echoes long after the spotlight fades. But you'll never find that life until you stop playing a role and start living with purpose. Until you confront the truth, you have not been living, you've been auditioning. And the stage you're standing on, you built it yourself. So the question is no longer, will they clap? The real question is, what would you build if no one ever clapped again? There's a reason you feel hollow even after all you've built. You've done the work. You've gained the skills. You've climbed the ladder. But something inside you still aches, and you don't know why. The truth is, you've inverted your nature. You're no longer standing as a man, you're living as a reflection. Otto Weininger spoke of this inversion with haunting clarity. He wrote that woman lives in the reflected light of man. And yet today, it is man who reflects the reflected light, living for glances, for praise, for applause. You scroll endlessly, post strategically, wait for the dopamine drip of digital approval. But behind every post, every accomplishment, every smile, lies a deeper question. You've never asked, am I doing this to build or to be seen? And if you're honest, the answer terrifies you. You've mistaken the feminine hunger to be admired for masculine achievement. You've adopted a performance mindset, not as a creator, but as a mirror, not as a source, but as a surface. You've become addicted to attention, to being chosen, to being wanted, not because it empowers you, but because it fills a hole where your identity should be. But you were not built to reflect. You were built to radiate. Masculinity isn't reactive. It doesn't bend toward applause. It doesn't twist itself into forms that fit the trend of the week. Real masculine energy stands alone. It initiates. It holds. It creates with or without an audience. And every time you chase being seen, you surrender your masculine authority. So ask yourself, who are you when no one is watching? When the followers fade, when the lights go out, when the only voice left is your own? Does that voice carry weight, or does it echo with uncertainty because you've spent your life echoing others? You were not made to reflect someone else's light. You were made to burn with your own, not to impress, not to perform, but to be, fully, fiercely, unapologetically. And until you return to that fire, you will continue to live in shadow, even in the spotlight. There's a silence most men never dare to face. It's not the absence of noise. It's the absence of witnesses. It's the moment when the lights go out, the notifications stop, the crowd disappears, and all that's left is you. That silence is sacred. But to the man who's built his identity on applause, it feels like death. Because in that silence, the truth speaks. It asks, would you still do this if no one ever saw it? If your hands bled building a vision no one recognized? If your words echoed into emptiness? If your legacy was never applauded, only endured? Would it still be enough? Otto Weininger warned of this crisis long before the modern world drowned it in distraction. He knew that most men do not fear failure, they fear invisibility. They fear the unbearable loneliness of self-definition. So they fill the silence with scrolling, with validation, with her. Anything to avoid hearing the truth of their own soul. But here's the paradox, that silence is not your enemy. It is your crucible. The man who cannot stand in silence will never speak with authority. The man who cannot build without being watched will never create with power. Because meaning is not found in being seen, it is found in being forged. The modern world has given you 1,000 ways to escape that silence. Every distraction is a cheap substitute for becoming, and the more you consume, the less you create. But masculinity is not consumption. It is endurance. It is carrying weight without recognition. It is building meaning with your own 2 hands when no one is watching, not because it's rewarding, but because it's required. So stand in that silence. Let it strip you. Let it confront you. Let it reveal whether you're a man of substance or a shadow performing for claps that will never come. Because until you can sit in silence and still feel your soul burning with purpose, you have not yet begun to live. You have only been echoing a life that isn't yours. You've worn the mask so long you've forgotten it's there. The mask of the high-value man, the mask of the provider, the protector, the stoic achiever. And at first it felt empowering like armor. But over time it's grown heavy, suffocating, turning into a prison built not from steel, but from expectation. You became what others needed, what the world admired. But in the process, you buried who you truly are. Otto Weininger warned us man becomes real only when he tears the mask from his own face. And that is the moment most men run from. Because the mask offers comfort, it offers safety, it offers applause. But authenticity, it offers nothing except the unbearable weight of full responsibility. And that's why most men never become who they truly are. They become performers, skilled, praised, and hollow. The world rewarded your performance. It called you respectable, successful, desirable. But you knew deep down that the man being admired wasn't real. He was a role you played, a mask you wore to survive a life you didn't choose. And that's the real betrayal, not what others did to you, but what you did to yourself in exchange for being liked. But here's the truth. The man you're pretending to be can't carry you through the fire. Only the man you actually are can do that. And to find him, something in you must die. The boy who waits to be chosen, the man who bends for approval, the performer who hides behind strength. That version of you must burn, not because he was weak, but because he was never truly alive. And what rises in his place is not louder, not flashier, not more impressive, but more grounded, more clear, more dangerous in the way only a man who owes nothing to performance can be. So the question remains, will you keep performing the life you think they want to see? Or will you finally live the one that only you can build? Because the mask may earn applause, but only the truth will earn your freedom. You've spent your life fearing rejection as if it were a death sentence. Every glance she didn't return, every invitation left unanswered, every moment of silence after you exposed your truth, it felt like failure, like proof that you weren't enough. But what if rejection was never the enemy? What if it was the invitation? The fire meant to burn away everything false and leave only what is real. Otto Weininger offered a brutal but liberating truth. He who carries his own meaning fears no rejection. Because rejection only destroys the man who needs to be validated. It has no power over the man who has already chosen himself. You see, most men don't fear being unseen, they fear discovering that their entire identity depends on being seen. And so they bend, they twist, they perform. Not because they are weak, but because they've never been told there is strength in being overlooked. But here's the paradox: rejection is the doorway to freedom. It shatters the illusion that someone else's approval can define your worth. It strips away the fantasy that you must be chosen to matter. And in that stripping, you are given something far more valuable than comfort. You are given clarity. Because once you have faced rejection without breaking, without collapsing, without chasing, you realize you are still standing. And more than that, you are now standing on your own. That is the beginning of true masculinity. Not being accepted, but being undeterred. Not being admired, but being unmoved. When you build for eternity, not for applause, rejection becomes irrelevant. Because your mission was never about being seen, it was about becoming. So let rejection do its work. Let it carve away every illusion you've built your life around. And when the dust settles, what remains is something sacred, a man who doesn't beg to be loved, but builds because he must. A man who doesn't need to be chosen because he already chose himself. And that, brother, is the only kind of man who can never be rejected. Look around you. The modern world is a temple to your senses. Screens flash. Notifications buzz. Pleasure is always just one tap away. You live in an era of endless entertainment, but you're starving. Because the soul of a man cannot live on passive consumption. It was designed to create, to struggle, to build something that stands long after his body fades. And yet, here you are, scrolling. Otto Weininger saw this decay long before it became mainstream. He warned the man who ceases to create becomes the slave of his senses. And that is exactly what has happened. You've traded discipline for dopamine, purpose for stimulation, and meaning for comfort. You've been told that ease is success, but it's not. It's erosion. It's what happens when a man forgets he was born to carry weight. You weren't meant to be endlessly entertained. You were meant to endure, to construct, to bear tension, and transform it into something lasting. But that kind of life doesn't come with likes. It doesn't show up in a highlight reel. It's forged in solitude, in discomfort, in silence. And that's why most men avoid it, because it demands something their comfortable life has never required: responsibility. The more you consume, the less you create. And the less you create, the less you exist. Because a man's soul is not expressed through what he owns, but through what he builds. Not just businesses or bodies or bank accounts, but meaning, legacy, depth, something real that didn't exist before he showed up. The tragedy is that most men will die full of potential but empty of creation, because consumption feels easier, because pleasure feels like progress. But it's not. It's a pacifier. So ask yourself right now, are you building anything that would still matter if the internet went dark forever, if no one could see it, if there was no audience, no feedback, no applause? Because until the answer is yes, you're still living someone else's life. A man who only consumes dies slowly. A man who creates lives forever. You've been waiting, quietly, desperately, for someone to see you, for someone to recognize the effort, the pain, the silent sacrifices you've made. You've waited for a father's nod, for society's stamp, for a woman's eyes to light up and finally say, "You're enough." But here's the brutal truth that will either free you or break you. There is no crown coming. No one is going to walk into your life and validate the man you were meant to become. No woman is going to rescue you from the weight of your own unrealized identity. And the longer you wait for that external permission, the deeper you bury the sovereign man inside you, the one who never needed to be chosen to begin with. Otto Weininger said it plainly: the man who waits to be crowned never becomes a king. Because kings do not wait. They rise. They build. They suffer in silence. And they carve meaning into existence, not because someone told them they were great, but because greatness demanded to be born through them. Every second you wait for approval is a second stolen from your destiny. Every moment you stall hoping for a sign, for a hand, for a nod, you hand your power over to a world that doesn't owe you anything. You weren't born to be appointed. You were born to decide. And that is the turning point for every man the moment he realizes the throne he's been waiting to inherit is one he must build himself, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, without applause, without ceremony, without fanfare. You will suffer either way, in the silence of standing alone or in the slow death of never rising at all. But only one path makes you a man. The other keeps you a servant to dreams that were never truly yours. So stop waiting. The crown isn't coming. No one is going to choose you. That responsibility and that privilege has always been yours alone. The question is, will you finally choose yourself, or will you die waiting to be seen? In a world addicted to validation, the most radical thing a man can do is choose himself, not perform, not wait, not hope to be seen, but to stand alone, clear and grounded in the truth of who he is, even if no one ever claps. The message is simple, but it's not easy. No one is coming to crown you. Not society, not your parents, not the woman you're trying to impress. And the longer you wait for their approval, the more your soul withers under the weight of unmet potential. The path to true masculinity, to meaning, to sovereignty, begins when you stop building for applause and start building because you must. It's about becoming the man who wakes up and moves forward, not for followers, not for fame, but because his mission demands it. That kind of man is dangerous, not because he's violent, but because he is free. He doesn't fear rejection. He doesn't chase attention. He creates, he endures, and he lives by principle even in silence. So the question is, what would you still build if no one ever saw it? That answer reveals everything. Because the only empire that will ever fulfill you is the one you build from within. No mask, no performance, no permission needed. Choose yourself ruthlessly, unapologetically today. That's when your real life begins.